In the spring of 1994, the world watched as one of the most horrifying atrocities of the 20th century unfolded, the Rwandan Genocide. So today, we're going to try to understand how something so completely unimaginable was even possible, how it was allowed to happen.
And this image from a memorial site is just a gut-wrenching reminder of the human cost. In 1994, the small nation of Rwanda was just completely engulfed in violence. But here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't random chaos. Not at all. It was a meticulously organized, systematic campaign of extermination.
And the speed of the killing was just breathtakingly fast. The whole thing was carried out in about 100 days. That's it, from early April to mid-July 1994. That's less time than a single season. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
And the human cost in that short time, it was just catastrophic. In those 100 days, we're talking about more than 500,000 people, members of the Tutsi minority, who were systematically murdered. I mean, the numbers are just staggering.
And the horror, it didn't even stop there. The violence was also weaponized in one of the most horrific ways imaginable, a systematic campaign of sexual assault. At least 250,000 women were subjected to genocidal rape. And this was a deliberate tool, It was used to destroy not just individuals, but entire families, entire communities for generations to come.
So the question that just hangs over all of this is, how? How could this possibly happen? How did neighbors turn on their neighbors with such unbelievable brutality? Well, the answer isn't simple. And to really get it, we've got to go back, way back, decades before the killing started.
All right, so to really understand the genocide, we first have to talk about how the very identities of Hutu and Tutsi were twisted and manipulated. This wasn't some ancient, timeless hatred that had been brewing for centuries. No, these were divisions that were hardened and then exploited by colonial rule.
So this is a really critical turning point. Before colonization, Hutu and Tutsi weren't these rigid racial categories we think of them as today. It was much more like a class distinction, based on your job. They shared a language, a culture. You could even move between the groups. But then the European colonists arrived, and they brought this racial ideology with them, deciding that the minority Tutsis were somehow superior, and they elevated them within the colonial power structure.
And this timeline here really shows you how that division got cemented in place. You see Germany at first, then after World War I, Belgium takes control. And they took a really fateful step. Look at the 1930s. They brought in mandatory ethnic ID cards. Think about that. Suddenly, every single Rwandan was officially labeled Hutu or Tutsi. What was once a flexible social thing was now a rigid, inescapable, state-enforced identity. And that one act, it was absolutely catastrophic.
Okay, so fast forward to 1962. Rwanda gets its independence, and power shifts to the Hutu majority. Now you've got decades of built-up resentment, political instability, and then a civil war kicks off in the 1990s. It was the perfect storm, really. The perfect breeding ground for a truly extremist ideology to take root.
And when the RPF, that's a force of Tutsi exiles, invaded from Uganda in 1990, things just went into overdrive. Hutu extremists jumped on the war to stoke fear, pushing this ideology they called Hutu power. The message was simple and terrifying. All Tutsis were the enemy. And they didn't just talk. They created and armed militias, like the Interahamwe, basically training them for what they were planning.
And language was one of their most powerful weapons. Propaganda outlets started calling Tutsis inyenzi, which means cockroaches. Now, this wasn't just a nasty slur. It was a deliberate strategy. It was about dehumanization. Because let's be honest, it's a lot easier to convince someone to kill a pest than it is to convince them to kill their neighbor, a fellow human being.
And the propaganda was terrifyingly blunt. The extremist radio station, RTLM, was broadcasting messages just like this one, day in and day out, just drilling the idea of extermination into the heads of ordinary people. There was absolutely no hiding what their goal was.
So the stage was completely set. You've got armed militias ready to go. You've got a population that's been fed a steady diet of hate propaganda. All it needed now was a spark, a single spark, to ignite the whole tinderbox.
And that spark came on April 6, 1994. A plane carrying Rwanda's Hutu president, Juvenal Habyarimana, was shot down over the capital. Hutu extremists didn't wait a second. They immediately blamed the Tutsi RPF and used the assassination as the excuse they needed to launch the genocide they've been planning all along.
The killing started almost instantly, and it followed this terrifyingly efficient plan. Step 1,
take out any potential opposition. Assassinate moderate Hutu leaders, Tutsi leaders, anyone who might stand in the way. Step 2, set up roadblocks everywhere. And this is where those ID cards came in. The militias used them to identify Tutsis and kill them right there on the spot. And finally, step 3, mass mobilization. The radio and local leaders literally ordered ordinary Hutu civilians to go out and kill their Tutsi neighbors.
So while all of this was happening, while Rwanda was burning, the world, for the most part, just watched. And the failure of the international community to do anything is a central and absolutely tragic part of this story.
You see, the genocide wasn't stopped by the UN or any other international force. It was ended by a military victory. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, fought their way across the country. You can see their advance here on this map, until they finally captured the capital in July. That's what ended the slaughter.
The international response was, to put it mildly, shamefully inadequate. There was a small UN peacekeeping force in the country, but their numbers were actually cut after the killing started. And a later French-led mission called Opération Turquoise was really controversial. I mean, yes, it did save some lives, but a lot of critics argue that it also created a safe zone that let many of the killers and the masterminds escape.
And what about the United States? Well, the U.S. government was still reeling from what happened in Somalia just the year before, so they made a conscious decision not to get involved. They knew a deliberate and systematic genocide was being planned, but they deliberately avoided even using the word genocide because that would have legally obligated them to act. It's a failure that President Clinton later called one of his biggest regrets.
The impact on the country itself was just total, and you can see it all in this one absolutely shocking graph. This shows life expectancy in Rwanda. Just look at that near vertical drop in 1994. That's not just a line on a chart, that is the signature of a society in complete and total collapse.
The aftermath was a nation just shattered. Over 2 million Hutu refugees fled the country, which destabilized the whole region for years. An estimated 400,000 children were orphaned. Now today, Rwanda has made incredible strides in rebuilding, it's true, but the scars are deep, and the country has put very strict laws in place against what they call genocide ideology to try and make sure nothing like this can ever happen again.
And all of this leaves us with the most haunting question of all. Could it have been stopped? I mean, the planning wasn't a secret. The hate was being broadcast on the radio for everyone to hear. The warning signs were flashing red. And that's a question that really forces us to think about the profound cost of indifference and what our shared responsibility is when we're faced with this kind of hate.